is a region in northeastern Bangladesh called Sunamganj, and it sits in a landscape that almost feels mythical. Wide open wetlands called haors stretch all the way to the horizon. Half of the year, these haors are farmland. The other half, they become water. Villages sit on raised ground like little islands scattered across a vast inland sea.
So this is in the northeastern side of Bangladesh. This area has a direct border with India. Cherrapunji, it's a place in India that is like only 80 kilometers away from this region of Bangladesh. And this Cherrapunji has world's highest rainfall record. This area, Sunamganj, is in the downstream of Cherrapunji. So even if this particular area doesn't have as much rainfall as India and Cherrapunji, it gets the water.
That's Iffat Baki Bushra, a native Bangladeshian who's now studying community and regional planning at the University of Texas in Austin. Her research introduced me to the embankment system we're talking about today.
Flooding happens in this area. That's kind of natural.
Flooding here isn't an anomaly. It's part of the ecosystem. And for generations, people have adapted their entire agricultural and cultural cycle around it. During the monsoon, the haors fill and fish flourish. And then slowly, the water recedes and sediment settles across the landscape. In the winter, the haors turn into rice fields, some of the most productive farmland in the country. And because the cycle is predictable, the community does something surprising. They break down their own embankments each year to let the floods in and rebuild them later to protect the crop. It's a rhythm they've lived with and lived by for centuries. But in 2018, that rhythm broke.
So right before they have cut the crops, this flash flood happened. So all the embankments are demolished by the flash flood. And now the farmers don't have the money they would get from selling all the crops. And also their homes are demolished.
For farmers who depend on one crop, losing rice isn't an inconvenience. It's losing food, income, stability, everything. So the government stepped in, rebuilding the embankments, bringing outside contractors to help, moving quickly, fixing the problem. On paper, it made sense. It's what governments do. But on ground, it didn't land the way they expected. When the government announced that they'd be hiring workers from other districts, the locals pushed back.
It's just manual labor. We can do those ourselves because we need the money right now.
At first, this was about survival. People had just lost their crops, their cash flow, their homes. Taking paid labor away from them was unthinkable. But once locals got involved, something deeper emerged. This wasn't just about labor.
They have lived there for all their lives, so they have the local knowledge of what might be the weakest point, where the force of water might be the highest.
Local knowledge transformed the project because the people who live there aren't guessing. They're not modeling water behavior on a screen. They're remembering where last year's flood broke, where the soil slipped, and which paths held up the longest. The Water Development Board brought in improved, more environmentally friendly materials, biodegradable geo bags filled with sediment. But the shaping, the labor, the decisions about reinforcement, that came from the people themselves. And suddenly, an engineering project became a co-produced piece of civil infrastructure. Not something built for the community, something built with the community. Stronger technically, stronger culturally, stronger socially, because people care for what they help create. When I asked Iffat what she took away from studying this project, she didn't talk about engineering, she talked about people.
You need to understand who you're talking to, who your audience are. Just injecting knowledge is not the right thing to do. Understand your people first.
This project worked not because the materials were better, not because the design was perfect, not because the funding was right. It worked because the community was treated as an asset. Because whether you're rebuilding a flood embankment in Bangladesh or reimagining a downtown corridor in an American city, there's a truth that planners, governments, and even well-meaning experts often forget. The people who exist in a place are its most valuable asset, even if they never show up on a balance sheet. Kady Yellow understands this. She's not only using her experience as a global expert in placemaking to engage her local community of Jacksonville, Florida, she's empowering citizens to lead the conversation, not inviting them to have a seat at the table, but inviting them to design, build, and set the table. Kady's work isn't about floods or embankments. It's about art, culture, creativity, and joy. But at its core, it's about the same idea. Communities hold knowledge of how they move, how they gather, how they celebrate, what they need, and what they dream. When people become co-authors of their environment, whether it's a rural embankment or a downtown activation, the place becomes more resilient, more joyful, more loved, more alive. I talked to Kady after the break. Kady Yellow is a globally recognized creative strategist, cultural producer, and educator whose work spans public art, community engagement, and civic transformation. With roots in both the arts and urban planning, Kady collaborates with artists, residents, and city leaders to co-create meaningful public spaces and creative infrastructure. She teaches emerging placemakers how to treat community not as audience, but as a co-author. Today, she joins us to talk about the power of joy, agency, and placemaking from within. Kady, thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Chip. It's a privilege to be on your podcast, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak on the subject matter and discuss it with you.
Awesome. So I want to just start by saying I feel like in the world of placemaking, I feel like you are somebody we should all be paying attention to. I'd love to hear just where you came to this intersection of art, people, and place. What were the pivotal moments for you?
It's a complicated question. I'll try to unpack it. Government plays a really important part in our lives. And ultimately, in my personal story, it was there from the day one, just given the lack of resources my family had and having to rely on government programs. From school lunch to, covering bills. We were always filling out applications and participating in government assistance programs. And what I learned very early on through that process, and then as an adult, when citizens would work through the process of civic participation, from voting to participating at city council, is Americans had a kind of unhealthy relationship to government. And I saw that it was rooted in a total misunderstanding of how government operates and then how it's supposed to show up. It's a hard lesson to learn, but government doesn't show up to your front door. When they do, it's not normally good. So you show up to government, and it's just like any good relationship. The more you show up, the more complicated and challenging that relationship gets, but ultimately the more rewarding it gets. So at the core of this work for me, from being a young child to a young adult in the field, was wanting people to have a healthier relationship to their municipality. I saw it challenging, but at the other side of that challenge, I saw a huge amount of resources, a huge amount of impact, and a quality of life, some terms that I know that we've been defining in the field for quite some time. So at the core of it for me, it was, how do we get ultimately more artists into City Hall? I studied engineering as an undergraduate, mathematics, and was always hanging out with the DOT guys, the Department of Transportation crew, and I found that they were making creative decisions. And so when I started to dig deeper into how we show up to government, how we participate, one of the problems I ultimately wanted to solve was bringing more artists and planners together through the municipal planning process, through the permitting process, through procurement, through, honestly, voting and policy changes. Because I truly believe, and I'm an artist myself, that there's no problem an artist can't solve. If you want to solve a problem, call your artist friend and have them think through it for you. They're going to bring an alternate perspective. They're going to be creative in coming up with solutions. And while their solution may not be plausible, that brainstorm and that process that the artist shakes up in planning, I found to be really important. So I come at it from a place of improving the everyday resident and artist relationship to their municipality and government, and wanting people to do that through specifically a process that I knew that was healthy and productive, and that's placemaking.
Was there a moment or an experience that kind of gave you that realization that creative work could actually shape systems, civic systems, not just beautify places, but actually create change in the civic world?
It was gradual. A truly formative moment for me. I was a teenager, and then Mayor Matt Ryan of Binghamton, New York, I was working with a woman named Mary Harris, who was running his economic development team. And she had appointed me the youngest commissioner for downtown development. And said, the way you interact downtown, the way you program it, the way you think about it and talk about it is really unusual. And I was doing it through the lens of creativity. And so that was a formative moment for me, that someone older than me, more experienced than me, saw me as an asset to what was typically, a room of folks who love numbers and who speak in economics. So that was an aha moment. That was a formative moment as a young woman to be pulled onto that commission. And it was so powerful and transformative for me and simple. It wasn't like I had to get on a plane to go overseas to have this life-changing moment or some inaccessible piece. Anyone could walk into City Hall and serve a role. And so I wanted to start to share that power and share that experience.
How did she find you? Like, paint a picture of like who you were, what you were doing that made her say, we want her to help us shape this.
Yeah, so I'll never forget it. It was winter break, my first semester in college, and I couldn't possibly understand having, 30 or 40 days off. And I said, I have to do something while I'm not in class. And I got involved with a graduate student's project called Fresh Cycles. It was on the city's north side, and it essentially was cycling youth out of poverty through bicycle repair. Super simple premise. It was an old police substation that had a really bad time in the neighborhood and wasn't really a great tenant, if you will. And they wanted to do something that was healthy with this police substation. And so they turned it into an after-school program called Fresh Cycles. And I got involved there, and it came from a place of lived experience and knowing that youth who at that time were called at-risk, low income, and thank God they're now being called opportunity youth, speak a whole different language. They have a whole different lifestyle. I understand survival skills, and I understand they just need time to play. And I knew I could get involved. They could see someone who comes from a similar background who, honestly, I wasn't that much older than most of them and had got myself into college and been on a path to try to get up and out of adversity. The mayor was involved because that was such a high-profile project given the kind of issues with the precinct in the neighborhood before that. I think it was, caught on fire and, just constantly harassed by the neighbors and pushed out, honestly. And so the mayor was always calling Mary, the woman I told you about, and saying, what's going on down there? How is it successful? And, really wondering how we were able to successfully graduate youth through a bike repair training program. They then got the bike, but then they kept coming back. And I had the opportunity, the bike repair shop was in the basement, and there was a mezzanine level or a first floor, if you will. And I had the opportunity to transform that space because the youth didn't want to leave, to a little computer center. We had a little kind of homework room. We had a kitchenette area. We painted all the walls together. I constantly came up with activities for the kids who were done with bike repair who wanted to stay at the facility because it was a playful and positive environment for them. So I believe that them seeing me as a young woman in that space and help lead so much as a teenager to other teens, that's when I got my first actual paid job with the mayor's office. I was a teenager, and he's like, come into my office. I want you to run this youth recycling program. And I believe it was that second step after Fresh Cycles when they saw me in the mayor's office, just how I interacted with the youth, how I scaled up a recycling program as a teenager is what got them to continue to give me a seat at the table.
So it sounds like, what I have seen kind of watching your work from afar, you're very much about involving people, not just informing people about the work. You've talked about that a bit. That sounds like that was in that early process of, yes, you're creating an experience program, something for kids to do to keep them occupied, but it sounds like they took some ownership, or they were empowered to take ownership over the project and the space that ultimately evolved, and because they wouldn't have come back without some sense of home, some sense of ownership.
Yeah, I don't think I knew exactly what I was doing until more recently in life. I was never that intentional. I never thought, I want there to be a sense of ownership, so I'm going to structure these programs. I was just like, I know this language, I know this culture, I know exactly what I was missing, so I'm going to provide it. I do believe now as a seasoned kind of expert in the field, and I'm always mentoring people in the field and always giving, trying to do right by the term placemaking that is currently being co-opted, slightly abused, thrown around a little bit, when it really has a clear definition, when it really does clearly have a best practices, when it really does clearly have structure to it. When I chat with other folks, I say, like, make sure you're a really good steward of this word. And I say this because to be a good steward of the word, the way you practice any form of medicine or social science, you have a style or a core set of principles and values that you work by. And that's really important that I challenge practitioners or up-and-coming practitioners. What are your core principles? And one of mine that is from the definition, from those who forge this field, is that participatory component. If you're not creating a participatory process, a sense of ownership, and sharing power, you are not placemaking.
Talk more about that. You mentioned the word has been co-opted, and I think the practice has as well. Like you allude to, there's a difference between plopping some cool beautification or some, I don't even know what the example I want to use, some like cornhole things and say, look, we've done placemaking if the community is not involved with how you get there. How do you know when something was created or co-created by a community who uses the space?
I know that I have a responsibility in the field today to articulate this. And I still, after a decade of research, almost 15 years of practice in the field, I wrote my first book on this topic. I've done a TED Talk. Like, I really have done the things, and I still struggle with this. So I will do my best to articulate what's happening in the field today. The way I determine, and I used to back away from it, I'd say, I don't want to be a placemaking police. Like, if people are out there making effort, it's great. I think that's negligent. I think that's naive. I have a responsibility as a global expert to say, let's start to think about how to deepen our practice and kind of self-certify, since there's not, like a dentist or lawyer, there's not a certification to this yet. What I see when I'm evaluating if it is or is not placemaking or what is good or bad placemaking is the process. And your question to me was, when you look at something, how can you tell if it was community-led? And for me, there's a spirit that the expert resident brings into a scene, and you can start to sense that. You can start to see that. You can start to feel it. If I'm standing on a project site and I can't tell where I am, like it's not unique to Jacksonville or unique to Austin, it's like a red flag that the community wasn't involved. If I'm standing in a site and everything kind of matches and it looks perfect, that probably didn't involve a community process. The way I describe it typically is it's like baking a cake. Placemaking is not hiring the best chef and having one person bake a cake. That is efficient. You're going to get the most beautiful, delicious cake, but you're going to tell that cake is baked by one person in a room. When you open the kitchen, you let everyone come mix a little, crack an egg, do a little thing here, you're not going to have a great cake as good as one person, like in that case, and it's going to look a little funky. But everyone's going to be attached to that cake and so proud of that cake. And it's like trying to explain the difference between those two cakes. You can just tell which one has the community's fingerprints all over it. So I hope as I develop my kind of litmus test for that I can help others identify what is and what is not placemaking. And for those who really want to nerd out on it, one of the best in the field is Dr. Kara Courage. She just published 6 or 7 white papers on the topic and is really taking a stab at this, like what is and what is not placemaking. And our field deserves that because the term is being thrown around and applied to what is just traditional development, urban planning, and architecture. Just because you're building a park does not necessarily mean that you're placemaking.
I want to talk to you about capacity. Because we started out talking about like how important it is for people to be more engaged with their government, right, in different ways. And as to go back to the cake metaphor, if I'm charged with I need to provide a cake for a party, the easiest thing for me to do is go pick up a cake at the bakery, right? And I have decorations to do. I have invites to get out. I have all the things. So I don't have capacity to get everybody in my kitchen to bake this cake with me. The other side of that capacity question is, I want to invite you all over for a party, but I want you to come make a cake with me first. It's like, I don't get off work. I got to take the kid. I think on that metaphor, like idea of engaging folks in community building generally and placemaking and kind of creating your government, right? And however that manifests, it takes a lot of capacity, which is a privilege for a lot of people. So I'm curious, how do you have the conversation with the civic people who are working for the government, who have a million things to do and don't have a huge budget and want to get something done, knowing that to do it right authentically and involve the community, it's going to be more expensive potentially and certainly take more time. And so how do you have that conversation? And then the other piece of that conversation is, how do you get people to engage who, have to get to their second job?
I actually feel guilty about this because I know that it's a privilege. I know that placemaking is not a priority, and it absolutely is a privilege. What I typically do is I make sure that the barriers to entry are zero. Because I know if there's even one thing in the way of getting into that room after a long day at work or dealing with family, folks won't show up. So I make sure there's no barriers in the way. Like, it is a hot knife through butter, getting to the classroom, getting to the meeting, getting to the activation. And then I make sure that it's not a heavy lift, that it's genuinely an hour of your time. And then I am so responsible and so cognizant that you could be anywhere. At most of my meetings, I say, you could be with your family right now. You could be working down your, million layer to-do list, but you gave an hour to this. And so I make sure that hour is, I don't mean to be dramatic, but life-changing. I make sure they leave there energized instead of depleted. I make sure that the format of everything that I lead or facilitate is extremely valuable to the participant. So that's on the resident side. I make sure that there's no barriers, it's easy to get to, and that it's not a huge burden. We make sure that it's digestible, that it's realistic, and I accommodate most people. Hey, I can't come at 3, but I can come at 4. What will I miss? And I just meet people where they're at. And I know that's not efficient, and I know that it doesn't fit in a 9 to 5, but it does show up in participation. Every class, every lecture, every workshop we do reaches capacity. So I know that method works. As far as the municipality, when you've got limited hours and limited budget, how do you tell a 9 to 5er to not go buy the cake and just bake it at home before going to the party?
I do love that metaphor.
Yeah, I like it too, but I'm like, okay, you need to also maybe delay the party so you can still, it's a great one. We could go deep with it. But with the municipal worker, I'm really mindful. I don't just ask in a way that, you've got all the time in the world, you're sitting around doing nothing. I always open the conversation while this is a lot to ask. I know it would be easier and faster to do X, Y, Z, but can I pitch you on an alternative approach? Specifically, when it comes to community engagement with the municipality, we've seen a huge shift now, mostly in the U.S. Western Europe's been way ahead of us and other countries, but we're getting better products when we engage the community. We're getting parks that are designed better and not reactive, they're proactive. And so we've now come to light at City Hall that it is actually going to cost you later if you don't involve the community. And so now it's not so much you should involve the community that might feel less efficient and, more timely. We're now asking, how do we involve the community? We're now looking at our community engagement methods and models. It's not I always say this, the 2 p.m. Tuesday meeting in a hard-to-get-to building. That's not where community shows up. How do you show up to the community to get their thoughts, ideals, and principles? So when you go back to your desk, you have that spirit on you, and you can make decisions that genuinely represent that community. And as you know, we could definitely unpack the word community. It's not a big blob of people. It's not a homogenous, monolithic term. There are specific types of communities. You should identify them, describe them, and make sure you're very intentional with who you're trying to target and who's at the table. So that's how I approach government planning, my government colleagues. I acknowledge that this might feel time-consuming up front, but that it's always a better product and it saves time later.
So I want to talk to you about the class. You have a placemaking class in Jacksonville that you've been doing for some time. How did that come about?
Yeah, we have a 6-week school, and I'll give you a little rundown. and I know we just talked about the term placemaking. I feel very responsible to educate Jacksonville, Florida to be the most understanding of this term. If I'm attached to a city, I want the residents I work with to also be experts in this term. So what I realize is you don't teach that overnight. This discipline is one that deserves deep conversation, many hours. And so how do I facilitate those forums, like I just said, without being too much of a burden on people's lives? That was the ultimate thing I was trying to figure out, is how do we educate? The second thing was the options out there are not great. There is a really expensive degree program in Brooklyn at Pratt. There are some online courses, which I don't know what studies show, but online doesn't work for me, so I can't imagine that it works in the field that's so tactical. I just looked at the product that existed because I would make recommendations, and I realized it's not great and it's not accessible. And I didn't want placemaking to be hard to get to. I don't want you to not be able to participate because you don't quite understand it, or to do projects that are not as great as you could achieve without really understanding these practices and principles. And so just being philanthropic, being in partnership with Foundation, and also seeing a trend in the U.S. around capacity building that was not prevalent over 10 years ago. It used to be like, you can't spend grant money on capacity. That word really stuck out to me. And I thought the way to build capacity is to educate and train barrier-free. And so the school kind of birthed. It birthed from something I wish I had when I was practicing as a teenager and a young adult. It's something that I really wanted Jacksonville, Florida to be proud of, so that people who were already doing this work could deepen their practice, expand their network, discover more resources for their work. And so it birthed this placemaking school. It also was a part of the process. So I run a program here. We do an open call for public space ideas. That's typically the format I practice in. I look at my programming dollars and I do an open call, and I spend the dollars based on the ideas that come through. And I found that, and it's not unique to Jacksonville. The other cities I've had a role in, people have skills gaps. Not everyone knows how to invoice or has filled out a W-9. Not everyone knows how to look at an MOU or contract and be really critical of it. And I thought these skills I find really easy to teach. So we could also incorporate that into a placemaking school, and not just go into the theory and best practices and history of that term in this field, but give the residents some hard skills in being a great business person with their creativity. So the school is kind of an amalgam of that. This is the third year of that. It's iteratively grown. The first year it was 4 weeks, and the demand was so high we had to do it a second time. And we went from 40 or 50 people in a classroom to over 100 last year. And even I'll never forget it. It was raining in Jacksonville. It was cold, and that's enough for Floridians to stay home. And the classroom was packed. We didn't see a decline in attendance. And the gentleman who represented the foundation at the time kept coming into the classroom like, what is going on? How are 100 plus people in these seats in a cold, rainy day, and no one's on their cell phone? They're all staring at the lecturer. So that's just a kind of a succinct way to explain the effectiveness of the program, the kind of high quality nature of the program, and that we've tailored it to the North Side mom, the East Side community champion, the kind of South Side corporate type that wants to do more events. And so we've tailored this incredible program that meets the needs of our city, and people show up and they love it. And it's pretty much a conference that I spread out over a 6-day conference that I spread out over 6 weeks.
So what are you equipping your students to do? Like when I go to your class, and you mentioned providing hard skills and looking at some of the skills gaps that are maybe transferable to a whole lot of different things. But in terms of placemaking and what you're teaching about placemaking, what are you equipping your students to do, and what are you seeing they're doing with it?
So I work at Downtown Vision, which is Jacksonville's business improvement district. And our thesis is that vacant spaces are underutilized because it's really hard to figure out how to use them, which is the permit process. So one thing we wanted to do was address the critical shortage of activities by teaching residents how to activate their parks and public spaces. So that's the core of the curriculum. You will come to placemaking school, and mind you, we've had people fly in from Michigan, drive in from Atlanta and South Florida, because you can still come from other cities and bring the knowledge back to your prospective place. The core of the curriculum is learning the municipal permitting process to gather in public spaces in the city of Jacksonville. That's the core skill that we're teaching students. That can be taught in a few hours. The permit process, even though it feels difficult and long, is an online application. You just have to know what to do and how to navigate it. Insurance can get really scary. Indemnification agreements, these terms, if you never have dealt with them and you're dealing with them for the first time in the permit, can be a barrier. So we just break down all the barriers of the permit process. The second thing we do is we teach hard skills in project management, business skills, how to just navigate government processes. So that's another, larger core component. And then we also teach kind of an introductory class on placemaking and urban planning. So these projects aren't just floating out in the universe, that they're grounded in a system, that they're attached to longer term impact. So we teach the principles of urban planning and placemaking. So a pop-up can have even deeper intentions and even more impact based on understanding how government works, how cities are planned, what downtown development means, what the interests of the developer are versus the interests of an artist and a passionate resident. So we go really deep into these topics. And then specifically in Jacksonville, the city is going through a historic boom. It's transforming very fast in a city that residents are fatigued of being told for 20 years, it's the next best city, it's the next best city, but not seeing RFPs go to groundbreakings, if that makes sense. We are now breaking ground. We're going vertical. We've got cranes in the sky. So what you see now happening is it's really confusing and hard to get involved in Jacksonville. And that's not unique to Jacksonville either. The everyday residents, like, I went to a city council meeting and that wasn't inspiring. That kind of took some life out of me. And so I try to make the points of entry very inspiring for the resident. You can come to our placemaking school, genuinely participate in government. We've got the councilman teaching Government 101. You're learning who your council person is if you didn't know. So you really are participating in just a more digestible, more comfortable format that's inspiring and hopefully leads to you then going into City Hall and getting involved.
A lot of the space you work in is this intersection between art and civic worlds. And when you're teaching creativity or in the creative space or teaching in the civic space, are you approaching that from two different vantage points? Are you approaching just that intersection?
I think even though a room of civic leaders and a room of artists both speak English, I think they speak two different languages. So oftentimes I find that I'm a translator. Because I've held municipal positions and because I am an artist, I can speak both languages and I can kind of interpret and build the bond there. To answer your question, I think it's the same iterative process to make art and to build your civic life. The same way an artist should feel totally okay with throwing the canvas out or painting over it, that's okay to do in government. If you have found yourself at a committee and it's no longer serving you or it's not what you thought, you actually want to, take a left turn into housing and you're, dealing in homelessness and the unhoused services, and you want to go into affordable housing, even though they're right next to each other in department per se, you can make those changes. And I don't know if that's the question, like, is there a difference in building your civic life and a creative process? But they both take the same leadership within yourself, an interest to want to do great, and honestly, a need to be creative.
So I want to talk about joy. Because I think a lot of the foundation of placemaking and engagement comes from joy. Can cities plan for joy? Is that kind of the goal? Let me reframe that. Can cities plan for joy without institutionalizing it? And does it lose its joy once you create the institutional systems that are required?
Yeah, it doesn't lose it. I think some of the greatest moments of joy for me are in cultural institutions. Walking up to the Met, walking through the Smithsonian to me is like utmost joy. I think the word that I come up with before joy is play. I struggle with that because I don't think everyone has the privilege to play. Like when you say live, work, play, like I really don't love that, but I get why it's used. They're saying first place, second place, third place, right? Live, work, play. Joy can be interpreted as what makes people happy and feeling connected. So if you ask me that same question, can cities plan for connectedness? Can we have really good spaces that we're attracted to, and that's where connection then takes place? And that to me is the happy factor. There's a lot written on happiness and how cities and urban centers provide and improve our quality of life, which is ultimately a conversation about happiness. I absolutely think cities can plan for it. I think right now, at the federal level and trickling down, is um, a reassessment of what government's role is. Is government responsible for quality of life? What should government be funding? What should they be doing, right? We're like totally redefining how government operates and what it funds and how it functions in a lot of places, in a lot of ways. And it's happening so fast that I don't even find too many venues I can have this discussion. Is government's role arts and culture? Is it play? Is it happiness? And oftentimes nonprofits, and especially business improvement districts, we're set up to be the gap filler. We're set up to be more nimble than government. We're set up to be able to be agile and meet times and steer the ship accordingly. So nonprofits are really great leaders, really great civic leaders, and really great stewards of public joy. So yes, it's possible. It's just a matter of where the funding is, who's responsible, and what the benefits are, because you can have an economic development conversation about structuring joy in cities.
For sure. So give me an example of something you hang on to, like a project that has provided that for you, that sense of joy or play or something that embodies that in your work.
So the core of the work is just really delightful. There's nothing more beautiful than seeing a resident really understand how public space is, how much access they really have. And I kind of half joke, whether you pay your taxes or not, public space is really public. You have a lot of access and power there. When I see a resident understand that and then go through the process of activating that space to look and feel like a place that themselves and their families and friends would want to go to, that's really joyous. And I want to go into an example, and I want to tell you one more analogy. I always talk about planning the family reunion for a family that's not yours. Like that is the most succinct way I can describe how public space is programmed. When someone in City Hall or in an ivory tower programs public space, they're planning a family reunion for a family that's not theirs. They're getting music and the venue and the food, but it doesn't represent the family's culture or interest at all. Misses the beat, if that makes sense. When you let the resident activate and program spaces, it looks and feels exactly like the best family reunion you've ever been, because they know the city, they know the community, they represent the culture, they can bring that to that public space. So I say all that because one of the projects that came out of last year's portfolio was called The Pop-Out. And it's led here by a local culture bearer and DJ, pseudo-social scientist named DJ Larry Love. He's one of the founders of R&B Mostly, private venue program, but he has started to bring his skills out into public space. And he concocted a series called The Pop-Out during Black Music Month in June, and intentionally had it in a park that's associated and celebrates the Johnson brothers, who wrote Lift Every Voice and Sing the Black National Anthem. So you've got this really intentional, highly curated series celebrating Black music and an incredible site of heritage and cultural preservation. To look out those Sundays in June and see hundreds of Black families just sit down and enjoy, and then come early, stay late, and enjoy that concert series that truly represented them, their community, went deep, in spirit and in root, is pure joy for me. People enjoying public space, unadulterated, and in the way that they want to, is joy. And that's why I work every day, and I'm very motivated to facilitate that.
That's beautiful. And where did that project initiate from? Was that the artist?
Yeah, so I was mentioning, and I did this in Michigan as well, and it's really cool. It's popping up all over the nation, and it's not like I invented it. It's just an open call for ideas. Every year in Jacksonville, Florida, we do an open call for public space ideas that are funded in the $5,000 to $10,000 range. We do a collection of about 10 to 15, and one of the projects that came through that process is called Love Fest. It was an activation of the Brooklyn riverfront, and that team was on its third year of funding, and it was pretty fatigued. The team just wanted to go back to focusing on music, and we had already allocated the money in the budget. And one of the team members, Larry Love, was a perfect steward of that money to keep it in music as a category and not, go back to the general fund. We have a stage shortage in downtown Jacksonville. We have a desert. It's really dry for acts, for our musicians. And so the number one interest was to make sure that money was still allocated to live, free outdoor music. And so the pop out kind of budded from that process.
So we're seeing more and more positions in municipalities and bids and other organizations for placemaking, people to nurture this and do this. And kind of to your earlier point, that is fantastic. And there's also perhaps a shortage of education about placemaking, what it is. And so I think you might see some cities saying we need a placemaking person without really understanding what that is, other than we need some more Instagram moments. But I question, talking about the open call for projects. If I get a new job as a placemaking manager for City of Small Town and I had a little bit of a budget, what advice would you give me to start that? What red flags or opportunities, or what would you have me particularly focus on?
I've never been asked that, and I love that question. So allow me to think out loud too a little bit. First of all, I just want to brag on Jacksonville because 15 years ago when I got started and 10 years ago when I got my master's, there weren't really positions in placemaking. There were, but they were using different titles. Jacksonville, Florida, we have 3, now 4 people with placemaking in their title. We have a director of placemaking at our local foundation. We have a creative placemaking specialist 2 neighborhoods over. And we have my position of vice president of placemaking. We just hired Shelby Robinson to be a placemaking research fellow. I take that really seriously because some cities would absolutely die for one person with this in their title. I get calls every once in a while from municipalities or bids or arts councils, kind of where these positions normally end up, asking a similar question to what you asked. Like, we're going to hire a person. And the one red flag I see is hiring a person, not giving them a programming budget, or hiring a person in a placemaking position, but it's really tourism or marketing activations. You're like setting it up to fail. You're going to give people a wrong and bad taste, and you're not actually going to be placemaking. So if I was speaking to a rural director and they had a $20,000 budget, you're kind of asking me, would you recommend an open call, if or if not, and then what red flags or what fissures could they avoid? I think there's a couple ways to approach your budget. I like open call because I think you stretch the dollars the furthest. You get the most attachments to your honey pot, if you will. You get the most bees come into the honey pot. If you can do one of two things. You can look at that 20 grand for the sake of this example, and you can personally invest that 20 grand. You can say, you know what? I want to put all of it into seating for this one park. The park is just a grass patch. It has a really nice bathroom. It has really good lighting, but no seats. I'm going to spend, the money on seating. And then I'm going to spend a little bit more to maybe get people there to sit down and stay a while. You could be really successful in that. You would be more successful finding 5 people to give 4 grand to, and they put on programs that are BYOC. They invest that 4 grand into a program in the park, and then through their marketing advertise to bring your own chair or your own blanket, right? They both result in seating. They both result in a transformed park. But having those 4 or 5 people help lead in your budget process and programming is the difference. And I swear that the latter is the better approach. But things to be cautious of is good placemaking takes a long time. Don't promise your boss you're going to be successful in a year. Don't rest your laurels on 1 or 2 pop-ups. It takes a long time to get the flywheel spinning, but once it's going, it has centrifugal force. So that's a really important component, is make sure you're a good leader and you're communicating that this process takes a long time. Communicate, think about like relationships. You don't just fall in love and it's the best relationship ever. It's that initial moment, and then you foster the relationship, and over time it gets better. So as a leader, a placemaking position, you've got to be aware of that. And then I swear by that participatory budget process. If you were really scared and said, oh, that's way too risky, take your 20 grand, break it down into 10 and 10. You spend 10 with your board, spend the other 10 with the community, and make it a competition. See whose work looks and feels better and is more successful based on your metrics of attendance and impact and area businesses being visited. So I could go really deep into what to do and what not to do in your tenure, like as in your first year of these positions, and what to do with limited budgets.
How do you consider longevity in terms of, like, you mentioned, like, do a bring your own chair event because you can get a little more out of the mileage. But how do you think about, like, what happens after the activation? And maybe the question is deeper about the difference between placemaking and events. And I think events can be placemaking, but how do you think of the day after the event? What's the impact? And is that something you're considering as you're putting together your budget, looking at your submissions? Like, how is this going to affect this place when everybody takes their chair home?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and one that my mentors are constantly posing to me, because now you're getting into strategic placemaking, and that is not my strength. And also, I want to give a little bit of background. Jacksonville is one of the first non-grant funded positions I've held. So my position in Flint was grant funded. It's really hard to think long term when every year you have to rewrite the grant for your salary. It just becomes challenging. Jacksonville is the first deep breath I could take where I'm like, I'm going to be here a long time. Paycheck is coming. I can use the energy and time to fuel this program. And I want to talk about a couple of things here with longevity. And ultimately what I think you're talking about is sustainability. But before I do, I want to break down the events versus placemaking. Events are in a boardroom, a small group of people, a product is formed and then marketed to the masses. Large events are often a detriment to public space. It degrades the asset. It leaves garbage behind. It's really expensive. It's one and done. The impact is not typically there. What a good event does when it kind of shifts into placemaking is the conversation is not just in the boardroom, it's with the community. And what you're ultimately looking at is the space itself and how to improve it. That's the difference between an event and placemaking, is your intention to improve the space long term. The placemaking pop-ups that we do are limited truly by resources. We have short-term money. If I had $1 million and was only doing pop-ups, I would feel really guilty because you can do a lot with $1 million. We have $100,000 for pop-ups. You can't change the world with that. So I'm always leading by saying, if you don't want to do 10 projects at 10 grand, you all want to put the 100 grand into one place because you think it'll be more impactful, it will improve our longevity and sustainability talk, let's go that direction. But for right now, we're doing 10 projects at 10 grand with the 100 grand, give or take. The longevity conversation will come when there's substantially more resources in this field. The field is very new. The positions are new. Budgets allocated to this are very new. So we have tiny budgets. That doesn't mean that everyone does. The state of Michigan does a phenomenal job at really investing in placemaking, but we have tiny budgets. So I always say, what is the best and highest use? What is the most we can do with the $100,000 or so? And I give it to the community to decide if it's one space or 10 spaces. And so I think there's that piece that we're truly limited by resources. And then there's the reality that this work is still really new. And I'm still really new to being in a position where now as a leadership role, my responsibility is to think long term. So how are the pop-ups catalyzing the discussion and or subsequently leading to an improvement in the space? We have a park here called Main Street Park. It doesn't have bathrooms or electric. Is the pop-up really helpful? Does the pop-up educate people that it doesn't have electric? Does the pop-up help people understand why it doesn't have electric? Does the pop-up lead to us getting into the CIP and installing electric? That is the placemaking process. You're not gonna be able to touch and feel it the way people crave. They're like, "Kady, you're not gonna, like, leave the garbage cans behind in the seats." Like, it's not physically changed. The impact is not tangible. It's in the people. It's not really expensive to get people in a space and form a place that they can start to talk and connect. That's the real bread and butter of what we do. It absolutely should be improving the public space over time, and we can find ways to improve that practice. But the real impact, the longevity, is the 16,000 hours that Placemaking Jack's project leads invested into their projects this year. You can't touch that. You can't feel that. You can kind of wrap your head around that number, but that's the longevity.
We all want to take care of the places that mean something to us. And so I think there is a force multiplier of just emotion.
No, just thinking of the Main Street Park, like if you're going to drive by that park every day and be like, "Oh, that park." And now the 600 or so people that are attached to that through this process are like, "That park." Like
Right, my park.
That's what I'm trying to articulate.
My park, yeah.
Exactly.
What do you outside of Jacksonville, what do you see the biggest barrier is now kind of in the industry? Is it funding? Is it policy? Is it mindset? What's the biggest block we're coming up against to creating meaningful places?
So the number one barrier, I talk about this in the TED Talk, is the folks who are building and governing and funding and managing our public spaces are not the end user. That is the number one barrier. So the solution to me is, how do we get the end user, the people who are actually use it, or if it's a destination park, those who come to it, how do we get them to help shape that space? Where does that moment happen? It's typically 2 or 3 years before that park was built, or it could be policies that were in place decades ago. And so the number one barrier is municipal processes. That's what makes building great places really hard. One component of that is the permitting process. Like, I have a full-time job and a full-time staff who deals with permits, and they want to give up most days. It is just the most annoying, stressful, constantly changing, unclear political battle, for lack of better words. We expect our residents to navigate that it's not successful. And so we have public spaces programmed by those who can survive that permitting process, which is not everyone and is not the majority. And then we have public spaces that are built and programmed by folks that aren't using them. And those are just two barriers that I see throughout the country. Flint, Michigan was some of my most formative years. I was the first director of placemaking in downtown Flint at the tail end of the water crisis. And that city taught me that those who are in power sometimes and oftentimes don't reflect the everyday resident. Yes, we vote. Yes, our person is meant to represent us. But those who have the privilege to serve in a public service role typically are able to make the sacrifice to serve in that role. So it leaves a lot of people out of the process just by design. And so therefore the downtown and the city didn't reflect the community. And that was this huge gap that I knew placemaking could fill and did fill. And I think that I see that in Jacksonville and other cities too. We have to motivate people in a barrier-free, really digestible way to get more involved with their city shaping so that it can better look like them and reflect them.
In terms of coming back to the teaching piece of it, what have you learned about your process through teaching?
I've learned a lot. I also, just to close up the conversation on the privileges to serve a public role, I always acknowledge that my position is privileged. I take it seriously and I steward every single penny and dollar with utmost respect because I represent the everyday person through that process. And I want the everyday person to have that, to share in that privilege. I want them to feel the joy I have in molding public space and participating in that role. So I'm really obsessed and passionate about creating opportunities for folks to do that. What I've learned most recently is that I keep coming back to this concept of power. I'm going to mispronounce his last name, but I think it's Eric Liu from Citizen University. He has a book called You're More Powerful Than You Think, and that has been really formative to my practice, and teaching on this has been really formative. I think it's really negligent to say all public space should be for everyone. Like everyone's invited. This is made for everyone. It's just not how it works. We have to be more intentional and more curatorial with open public space. How you define family friendly is different from how I define family friendly. The way you dance is different from how I dance. And so it can be really volatile to just mix anyone and everyone in public space. So I think the way I approach it is more nuanced and allows public space to feel a little bit more private and intimate for the person who's activating it. Another thing I've learned recently that has affected my practice is public space is publicly owned, but there's not equity in it. And so if you are bringing your value to a space that you have no real stakeholder ownership over, who are you serving? Where is your value and what are you going to get at the end of the day when you decide to not go uh, to your family and instead to a placemaking program or class or pop up? And so one thing I've been really interested in is equity, even though I know it's a little bit of a high alert term and under scrutiny, is do you own, like, are you owning 100% of nothing? Where should your time, talents, and treasures, thank you, Isaiah Oliver, be invested in? And what's the return on that investment? Like just a basic business principle. And then another thing I've learned a lot. So I kind of feel like Downtown Vision, the job I have now, is like my first real corporate gig. I've worked in corporate, but not like this. I'm a vice president. I, work for two lawyers. It's the best and worst thing, but really so amazing. So it's a really corporate gig at the end of the day. And what it has taught me is I wish that we brought corporate principles into community. And I want to be really intentional when I say that. Community needs HR. It gets sticky in the streets. We need processes so that we are run like a machine so that we can grow community. If you want to build community, you need to look at how corporations build and grow. And just seeing the behind the scenes at Downtown Vision, we are run so efficiently, so legally, right? Ethically, to a T. Everything has a process, a procedure, and we have standard operating procedure. Like everything is very structured. We know where to go to get something done, and we have HR, and we have these processes when there's a conflict at work, and it's very clear on what to do. I don't think we should be strict in building community because it's not that black and white. But I have learned so much from corporate that I wish I could bring to the streets, specifically conflict resolution processes.
It's messy. Like when you're talking about things that are shared, like, and we all share our public space, we all have ownership, even if we don't have equity, it gets messy. And so how do you navigate that? And a lot of it is power, a lot of it is control, and there's not an HR department keeping us all working by our handbook that doesn't exist for public space. Right.
Yeah, it's a dream job of mine to be HR of the streets. One thing I did implement as a result is I have community standards and like a guideline document. When a team comes to work with me, I say, okay, you define your community standards. And I have this conversation. Think as if you're HR. What are you going to allow and not allow? And in the cases of the stuff you don't allow, what's the process if that happens? What's the internal process? And at what point do you come to me? And then also, here's my boss's contact information. At what point do you go to him? And they create these. It's not long. It's not a huge long manual. It's a few pages. And they write down the do's and don'ts of their space and their community and their pop-up and what they would do in the case of a don't. And it's been a very formative and beautiful guiding document.
That's powerful. The intentionality behind that.
It's just the lawyer influence. Like nothing's going to happen. We've never had anything happen.
Right, till it does.
Yes, but we don't want to have this conversation after it. Let's have it now just in case. And we bring that structure to the placemaking community work. And it's like, this is a match made in heaven.
I have a million more questions and things we can talk about, but I know I want to be respectful of your time. I do want a really important thing that I want to find out about. I've been working in place management and placemaking a little bit for a long time. I've gotten a lot of awards, accolades. I have an honorary citizenship. I have all the things. But as far as I know, nobody has ever written a song about me. You have a song that somebody wrote about you.
I do.
How'd that come about? Tell me about that.
It's a really beautiful song, and it was pre-AI. It's not that cool anymore if you know about AI song making. It was commissioned by a country female singer, custom made. Um, that is just the powerful effect of this work. So I got started in upstate New York. That's where I was telling you at the beginning of the podcast about being the youngest commissioner. And I started an art collective called Kady Yellow Studios in a nice looking space on our main street, in a main street that was just barren at the time. A few things, but a lot of vacant storefronts. And there was a riverfront park, not even half a block down, that one of the city employees worked really hard to put a stage and sound and started activating. And Kady Yellow Studios was like my first attempt at bringing artists to the table, seeing what they wanted to do to program their city and programming them on a $0 budget. And I worked with so many artists over those years, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of artists over those years, whose lives I believe were literally changed from a volunteer-led creative project in an art studio on what was called, Court Street, our main street in downtown Binghamton. And that was a dear colleague at the time, Mark Urban, who was really interested in the process and filmed everything. Like if you Google Mark Urban, Kady Yellow Studios, you're going to see hours and hours of video of our art walks, our First Friday, our pop-ups, our galleries, our concerts. He just filmed everything. And he did it as a gift. He did it to kind of just say thank you for transforming our once pretty sleepy, depressed city into a really vibrant place. Again, no dollars back then, just a space for artists to come together, show their work, have conversations, opportunities, push the envelope a little, push our practice, give us purpose. Like that was the whole nucleus. And it was really, really powerful. And so that song was a gift for that work.
That's amazing. Well, it's a beautiful song, and it's a beautiful tribute to you and the work you've done and continue to do in creating meaning and raising the color of the town. So keep it up. It's been a joy to talk to you. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for jumping on with me.
Of course. Thanks so much. I look forward to follow up. And if there's anything ever I can do to help you, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Kady Yellow has led creative placemaking and public art projects in 6 countries in more than a dozen U.S. states, shaping programs that center community voice and cultural expression. To explore more of her work or dig into her tools and frameworks, visit her site at placemaking.life. Before we wrap, I've been sitting with something from the Sunamganj story. I focused on the embankment project that emerged after the 2018 flood. This really beautiful example of what happens when community knowledge becomes part of the solution. But this wasn't a happy ending. In 2022, the region was hit again by a catastrophic flood, one of the worst in recent memory. Homes were destroyed, fields were wiped away, entire villages were cut off. Many lives were lost. I keep thinking about that because it reminds me that these projects, the embankment, plazas, the festival, none of them are the finish line. They're part of a much longer process of learning how to live with change. Sometimes that's climate change, sometimes economic change, sometimes cultural or political changes. Cities are dynamic. What these stories show us, what Kady's work show us, is that community isn't just a stakeholder, it's a form of infrastructure. And what makes it so valuable might be that it's the only type of infrastructure that is as dynamic as the city itself. It's the resource that makes a place more resilient each time the world shifts under it. It's the piece of the balance sheet we never write down, but everything depends on it. In this moment of escalating challenges, resilience doesn't come from building things for people, but from building things with people. That's the work, and it's ongoing. Sidewalk Ballet is presented by Big Creative Consulting, strengthening community through culture and place. Learn more at bigcreativeconsulting.com. Also by This Must Be the Place, a bi-monthly newsletter connecting placemaking professionals to opportunities. Learn more at thismustbe.org. Contributors include Abra Allen and myself. Engineering and editing by Ryan Musante. Our theme music was composed by the Peacoat Project. Kady Yellow's song Get a Feel for Kady is performed by Zarni Devet. Thanks so much to Iffat Baki Bushra for sharing her story of Sunamganj. There are links about this project as well as other projects, people, and organizations mentioned in the show notes or at sidewalkballet.com. If this conversation resonated with you, please share it with somebody who's doing the work of keeping their community whole. And join the conversation on our Discord server, also linked at sidewalkballet.com. I'm Chip. Thank you so much for joining us on this block of the Sidewalk Ballet. I'll see you downtown.